You
Sure,
recently penned a
sure.
piece on Roots Action. I think you titled it "The Ghost of J. Edgar Hoover Looms Over 2023," and you were talking about Section 702
Yeah.
of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and it's looming either reauthorization or
Yeah.
sunsetting. Can you give us a little perspective on what you were talking about there, and why we should really be paying attention to whether this act continues with
It
authority?
really, it's the whole thing with Section 02 really, um, this is 5 years, and then it has, as you said, comes up a reauthorization or sunset or possible modifications,
Yeah.
right, before it's reauthorized. That all happens by the end of the year in terms of its in-force mechanism. But
Mhm.
of course, they don't want to wait until the end of the year to continue or let's say sunset it.
Mhm.
Um, it really grew out of the FISA Amendments Act, and that goes back to
Mhm.
2008. That's where it all started,
Yeah.
which actually has its own history in terms of sort of ex post facto, and I'll call it that,
Yeah.
legalization of what were patently unlawful, unconstitutional surveillance programs that I was a part of
Mhm.
in exposing sort of
Yeah,
the
and FISA,
epigenesis.
allows FISA
Yep.
allows the entire collection of foreign intelligence
Well,
information
by definition, it's
by
interesting,
definition.
even though there's a secret court within a secret appeals court, it was a compromise solution, but it's important to note for those who will listen to your program, Jeffrey, that it really grew out of all of the scandals and all of the unlawful activities conducted by the U.S. government in secret, which in many cases, especially the surveillance side, have been ongoing for decades.
Yeah.
Multiple programs across multiple agencies, all coming out. The Church Committee, the Pike Committee, Bell Abzug, Rockefeller Commission. And so in 1978, they passed under President Carter the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, as
Mhm.
well as creating two standing committees for intelligence oversight. One housed in the House of Representatives, the other housed in the
Mhm.
Senate.
Yeah, the HIPSI
Uh,
and SISI House.
HIPSI, shorthand HIPSI and SISTIA,
Mhm.
which I became quite familiar with as part of my own whistleblowing,
Same here.
um, starting early on after 9/11. But again, these super secret programs. So FISA, but it had to be compliant with the Fourth Amendment.
Yes.
So in the event that a U.S. person, and when I was in the military, we had annual training, quite significant. It was annual training, just refresher training, to keep us apprised, because there were modifications made with
Mhm.
FISA 5 times prior to 9/11 just to keep up with the times in terms of, or keep up with the technology. But it was always a Fourth Amendment standard.
Yes.
So you had to, well, let's just say, if you violated that standard, there were actually criminal penalties under the U.S. Criminal Code, 18.
Yeah, and the Fourth Amendment, to preventing unlawful searches and seizures.
Yeah, well, unreasonable, and you had the probable cause standard. So it
Yeah.
had to be one, it had to be reasonable.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with U.S. persons, which had its own unique definition, because it wasn't just natural born citizens, it wasn't just U.S. Citizens, it could also include all foreign nationals, and I'll say legal foreign nationals
Mhm.
resident in the United States or resident in U.S. territories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was used to be part of sort of the surveillance regime in terms of listening in on communications of various countries in my past, and
Mhm.
incredibly strict protocols were followed, and there was also a special procedure if you inadvertently captured communications involving U.S. persons, which, by the way, also included U.S. corporations. I don't want to
Yeah.
forget that. They
Yes.
added that.
Yeah. I mean, a bit of a difference. I
So,
mean, when I was at CIA, um, It was hammered onto us. We don't do operations against U.S. citizens. We don't do
Correct.
operations against U.S. citizens, and and that if one happened to fall in a net that we may have set outside of the U.S. Yeah, there
Mhm.
were so many standards. I used to also work in the Office of General Counsel at the CIA. There's so many boxes you had to check.
Yep.
So many, to make sure, we weren't violating the law. There was that sense that we're protecting our country, but we can't violate the laws of our country in doing so.
Precisely. Even in what you would call the secret side of government, right?
Yeah,
So even in the secret side of government, in fact, you would say there was in essence a more higher standard because it's in secret. There's things you can quote unquote get away with.
yeah,
And so but the Fourth Amendment standard, there was no exception made, and even in terms of national security. Now, there were some interesting provisos. You could, in fact, start a warrantless. This is a sort of original FISA pre 9/11.
yeah,
You could actually start a search and even engage even in seizure, right? In terms of evidence,
yeah.
but you still had to get authorization, right?
Mm,
But this
yeah.
was normally if someone's life was at risk or because of the circumstances involved. So that was a proviso built into the original FISA.
Yeah.
So Section 702, and it's understandable post 9/11, and then of course all the revelations. Well, what do we put into place in the updated FISA that will allow us to still go after foreign nationals,
Mhm.
and if they are communicating with U.S. persons, okay, and that includes U.S. corporations,
Yes. Mhm.
uh, we still have to follow the standard. Now, if it's just foreign, it was carte blanche.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
during my day, it's carte blanche,
yeah.
and I think that in part, I'll just sort of parenthetically insert at the moment,
Mhm.
when you had free license to pretty much collect anything outside of the U.S. person bubbles,
Yeah.
I think you set up a tension, meaning that once those guardrails were lifted post 9/11, right? How are you going to put them back into place? Well, in part, when all this came out, and of course, I was part of that,
Mhm.
the FISA Amendments Act consolidated and legalized a lot of that, and they had this special section. Now,
Mhm.
it does permit collecting information as part of the foreign national communicating with a U.S. person.
Mhm. Yeah.
The problem, just given the nature of technology, and this is partly why
Yeah.
it's so incredibly seductive, if you have the power in secret, well, while we're here, and then they have these
Right.
things called selectors, which go way beyond just a person,
Yes.
which allows you basically, oh, just sort of take it all, right?
Mm.
We'll worry
Mhm.
about it later. So NSA is the one that does that part.
Yeah.
And it turns out under Section 02, the FBI is the primary government agency that has direct access to that database.
Wow.
Well, that database is filled with all kinds of information,
Yeah.
and they've abused it. I'm going to cut to the chase. They just abused the privilege because now it's like, well, maybe we can look for other things.
Yeah.
Oh, what if it's possible crime being
Yeah.
quote unquote or suspicious activity,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
yet
So.
you're not meeting the Fourth
Mhm.
Amendment threshold, and you don't have to go through. In essence, it is a backdoor warrantless mechanism.
Mhm.
You can't say it's inadvertent because, in essence, you've already given yourself
You already know
permission.
to
Okay.
do it. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's they're looking for a crime, even though there's no suspicion of a crime being there. They're
Correct.
looking for a crime, and it's all in interpretation. Especially, if you get a motivated individual who just wants to, I don't know, look good on his review coming up, he's going to find something, maybe make a connection that isn't
Yeah.
really nefarious,
Yeah.
but they can make it so by saying, "Oh, well, I found this connection. This U.S. citizen, I found this connection with this foreign national who might be of
Might.
interest to us. So yeah, I mean, the checks and balances of the Fourth Amendment are, like you said, they're using a back door to get around it.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of 702. What I found interesting about 702
Sure.
is that it's what do they call it? Compelled assistance from electronic service providers.
Yep.
So it's not that they have a goes to Google, FBI goes to Google and say we want these records on such and such. With it being compelled, they can't say, well, we'll do it with a search warrant. There won't be a warrant. They're compelled to do so. And then if they refuse, of course, then it's going to be a secret court that says, no, you are compelled to do so by Section 702. Regardless of any of the process, where is the probable cause? Where is the Fourth Amendment in this? It's not there. And I think you made
Doesn't matter.
a point on that.
Or we pay lip service to it because, I mean, this is, you get into the titles, right? The various titles that apply. And so in essence, you get this gigantic carve out because it's for national security purposes. Now, this actually goes well beyond the original purpose of Section 702, which was really going after, quote unquote, threats to U.S. interests. Now, it could be national security interests, but it could be threats to other parts of U.S. interests, not just national security per se. This is sort of protecting who we are as a nation. Well, yeah, sort of the bad guys, quote unquote, just to use that phrase, the bad guys. Well, this goes well beyond just foreign, bad guys that have the label of foreign national.
Yeah. Bad guys who we want to see as bad guys. The collectors, if they want to see someone as a bad guy, that whatever, having every bit of information, having every bit of communication that they've had, if you want to see that person as an enemy, as a bad guy, there's nothing to change your mind in that sense.
Exactly. And remember, with selectors, and this is where it gets, I don't want to get it too much into the weeds on the technical side. A lot of people don't fully appreciate this. If you go to a particular node, I'll just say kind of a node or a location or a station on internet. I mean, again, there's actually specific language that's associated with a lot of this, but in terms of the net, you can sweep up because of the mechanisms of modern communications, which are, most of them are digital. There's still tons of analog systems out there and point to point, but most of the world's communications have gone digital. So you have vast streams of data where it's a mix of everything.
Yeah, it's incredible.
The U.S., I'm familiar in part with some of the earlier variations of the system, have extraordinarily wide access, not just on a nation state level, but also in partnership with certain other countries. So the access to foreign national information is quite extraordinary. It was inevitable. It's inevitable, unlike the earlier days, that you would in fact come across lots and lots of quote unquote U.S. person information.